Live is life. So fun story.
Mm.
I think Tim and I's daughter like outright lied to us today for the first time. So we were sitting in the car on the way home from the ferry, and she's talking about her little hair elastic that's on one of her dolls, and then she said, "Yeah," and then I ate it, and we were like, "What?" And then she's like, and I was like, "Where's your hair elastic?" And she was just like, "I chewed it in my mouth," and I'm like, "What?" So she's been doing this thing where she like pretend chews things, and she'll like pretend to eat, and it's sweet and cute because she'll like feed you a pretend imaginary cookie. So Tim and I, for like the entire drive home from the ferry this morning, we're pretty sure that our child had eaten a hair elastic, a little cottony one, nothing like plastic or anything, but I was like losing it. I was like, this is not okay. Only to find that, like, when I took her inside, Tim found two slobbery, chewed up
So wet.
hair elastics sitting in her car seat. So my child lied to me today. That's where I'm at.
It's the
To be
beginning
fair,
of the
I
end.
was not panicked at all. I was like, it's fine. It'll either break down in her tummy or she'll poop it out. I'll just keep an eye on her poops. It'll be fine.
That's like half of it with a toddler. You're just like, please don't put that in your mouth. Please don't put that in your mouth. What have you got in your mouth? Come back here. Like, no, nothing is faster in the world, I've convinced, than a toddler who you see shove something in their mouth and then they run away. You're just like, give me that back. It's wild.
Yeah,
I know it's not quite the same, but Spruce, my dog, is the exact same way.
It is.
He's always trying to pick stuff up he's not supposed to.
Yeah.
His favorite thing to do, his absolute favorite thing to do, is to pull the toilet paper off the roll, but never does it unless you're on the toilet. So he'll like come into the bathroom and he'll like walk up to you and you'll be like, "What are you doing in here?" And he'll like walk right up to you and he'll like look up at you and he'll be like, "Yes, you're very cute." And then he'll like grab the toilet paper and take off. Every time. Never.
He knows you can't do anything. He knows you're
and
stuck
I'm like,
there.
ah, exactly. He is
That's smart.
An evil genius.
My cat.
But he's also very dumb, so I don't think genius is
It's a fun game.
Relative
term.
Yeah, very relevant term.
Oh my God.
It's like we sometimes we put dinner out for him and my wife will be like, "Oh, I don't think he likes it." And I'll be like, "I've seen him eat shit. Like I've literally seen him eat poop at the park. He doesn't get a say at the quality of his food." Like at that point he forfeits
the right to choose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have similar problems with your child.
I
But,
mean,
you know,
they're like,
apparently she eats elastics, so you know.
She put an old grape in her mouth.
She found a grape on the floor in the kitchen and she ate it.
And it was gone. I wasn't fast enough.
Yeah, that was a high.
Yeah,
there's a highlight of our parenting.
Sneakily fermenting wine.
She's eating some crayon. She's taking a bite out of ground, but then and sand. She's eaten sand a couple times, but it's always like she'll do it and then she'll look at me and she's like,
she regrets her decision immediately.
I know people in their teens and in their 20s who still eat similar things. So I think she's gonna be fine.
Eat sand, and then I gotta get in there.
Just the thought of sand in my mouth is
horrible.
Not good.
It's horrible.
Also, Tim, welcome to Chatwater.
Hey,
yes,
thanks.
I know he doesn't. It's basically like the Sean picture in the bottom, just different goatee and
All you need is a mug up
He
against
needs a
your
mug.
face.
Can you do your best Sean impression for us? You've got to have a Sean impression.
I gotta say it because it's got to be good. Maybe next time I'll come on.
What are you gonna say for when Sean's here?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's only a good impression if the person you're doing the impression of sees it. Yeah.
Oh, he'll see it.
He'll see it.
I don't sound like that. I haven't consciously worked on it enough.
Okay. Well, for your DM one.
Yeah. So Tim is going to be joining us tonight for this episode. And then next week it'll be, I think, myself and Yanis and Cody. And then when Sean joins us again, when he comes back from vacation, It's going to be Tim, whenever that is, it's going to be Tim's DM episode. I realize
eventually.
I realize we've been pushing your episode back for a month. So I appreciate it.
It's fine.
It's what happens when you're married to one of the people. It's just you become very easy to move.
Yeah.
You'll do it next week, right, honey? Yeah.
You're free next week, right?
I know you're
doing
free.
anything?
I know you're free. I know you're not doing anything.
I know your schedule.
I'd just be in the chat.
It's true.
Should we roll that intro
Let's
and get
do
started?
it.
Oh, so lovely.
It's just so good.
So
I was laughing. I was laughing because I wasn't able to join on Saturday, but when I scrolled through our little personal Facebook chat afterwards, the amount of people who are either super nervous about coming back in too soon after intros or like breaks, and
it's
like
true. It's real, man.
People like psych themselves out where they're like, I'm not going to do it, and then they're like, do I go now? Do I not go now?
It's because you just know you're going to get razzed for it. You're just going to get so razzed for it.
But no one gets razzed for coming late. Just wait.
Yeah, exactly.
No one's like, you were the last one, so just wait.
It's true. But
everyone's so excited to be the first one back.
Yeah. It's just because there's a brief moment where you're the only one on the screen, and it's just like your beautiful moment to shine. It's great.
It literally took months for it not to be Lennon being like, shit.
I always try, but then somebody beats me to it, and then the thing moves, and I'm like, oh shit, okay, I gotta go over here.
And then there's Sean, who like literally bounces before we're even done talking. Like his screen flips out of it. He's laughing.
Boom. It's just a button for him.
We're taking a break. Okay, cool. Bye.
Great.
Okay. Welcome everybody to our episode of chatWater. We got a special one here for you guys tonight. But I think first, if you want to talk about our sponsors and support.
I love talking about sponsors. Yes, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and a big thank you to our sponsors, Legendcraft and Silverwing Armory. Please go head on over to their Instagrams and their web pages to check out. They've got some fantastic online stores. And if you like anything in the shop, use the code Blackwater at checkout for 10% off at Silverwing Armory and 5% off at Legendcraft. You're supporting a fantastic Canadian company and also supporting us in this wonderful little thing that we do. We're also sending out a big thank you to Keisha from Fairy Dragon Dice. She has made us some beautiful dice that I was rolling with, and I think everyone has been rolling with for the last couple sessions, which is so nice. And I also know that Keisha has some special things in the works that she and I have been chatting about. So stay tuned to our Instagram for those when they roll out. And also a big thank you always to our artist, Tiana, miss._Marston on Instagram. Oh man, so Tiana is working on some super secret special art, not the level 15 art, but some other super secret special stuff. And she sent me a preview of it. And it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. So yeah, just throwing it out there that we love Tiana and she's the best. She drew all those wherever the box is. She drew those wonderful little sketches of Sean, myself, and Yanis. And she is coming up with a whole bunch of other art for us for our level 15 when we get there, because we're not there yet. So all in all, we love our sponsors, we love our partnerships, and thank you for that. So yeah, that's that. That's all I got with announcements. Oh, nope, that's not true. I have one more announcement. On Wednesday, we have Behind the Screen, a DM Roundtable coming back this week with, I think it is Tim and Matt and Cody and Adam coming this week to talk all things DMing. We're really excited because starting in September and October, we have some guests lined up, which are going to be awesome. But this month, the guys will be coming back and starting with some topic and just branching from there. So really, if you're interested in DMing or any really interest in kind of running any sort of RPG, come join us. I'll be in the chat. I know likely Jen and Len will probably be there too. So come hang out with us and yeah, come have fun. And then we're back on Saturday for our fantastic trip down the money hole. So yeah, that's what I got. Now I'm done announcements. There we go. That's it. Now I'm done.
It's really like such an all-star group of people to like learn DMing from.
Yes.
Like such a good group. I mean, everyone knows Tim is amazing. I think everyone got to see. Did everyone see an Adam session? Yes, for your birthday.
Yep.
Adam is also an amazing DM. It's I've never actually played a game that Cody's run. Maybe Cody. But yes, tonight's one is actually kind of in that sort of vein of like DMing and how we play. We're going to be talking about role playing and sort of the importance of it and how you do it, sort of tips and pointers. But I think Em and I and Tim were talking before the show that we sort of was like very important to note that like there is no, like we said last week, there is no wrong way to play D&D. So these are just sort of like helpful things or things that we found, but there's definitely not like a hard set rule of like, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
So like, if you hear something you like, take it. If you hear something you don't like, you don't have to listen.
That's super okay.
We're just a bunch of peeps who talk.
And I think we also come in with perspective too, that like our game is a very role play forward game, narratively driven with combat that seems to flow and make sense. And we're not just moving from like combat to combat to combat. Where the something that I'm always really curious about is like when narrative is just a vehicle for combat, it just like narrates the little bits in between. Whereas I think something we're going to talk about tonight is like how to, you know, things that you can do probably within yourself to up your role-playing game, and then also things you can bring to the table to help instill role play at your table if that's something you want to do. Yeah, that's great. So I thought we would kind of start off by like defining what is role play. Probably first and foremost, because a lot of people, I mean, role play is a word that is connoted across a whole bunch of different things. So role play in the context of gaming is anything that is done while assuming a character or role of another social being in a fictional setting. That's like the broad definition of role playing. And this is something I learned yesterday when I was reading some journal articles about role playing, because that's what I do. We do science first on this show. People have been role playing in game-like contexts since the earliest recorded history of it is from the Han Dynasty in China, and they were using this role-playing game to like pretend to be people from a previous dynasty. And they would do this as like a game. There was like a game involved with it at big court dinners. It was this huge like multiplayer, like hundreds of people participating.
Murder mystery sort of scenario.
Absolutely. It's just like a historical LARP. We'll talk about LARPs. I have lots of thoughts about LARPs.
Emma's been dying to get to LARPs for so long.
Dying to get to LARPs.
She has so many things she's been teasing me about with LARP, and all I know is Role Models is my only point of reference. That really crazy, terrible movie is my only point of reference for LARPing.
I was visiting Montreal, and I stumbled into a full-on LARP game going on.
That must be an incredibly
just like walking down this path, and it was like, oh, there was like a field. People were just like running at each other. It was wild.
How old were you?
I would have been. It was when I went back to visit, so I was probably like 19. It was very like, okay, like, and they were everywhere. Like it was all of a sudden, it was all happening around me.
LARP, like, just all of a sudden LARP. Yeah.
I like how LARP gets like a sort of a weird sort of thing around it, but no one, I mean, I guess people do kind of make fun of Renaissance fairs, but they're essentially just like a different kind of LARPing. Like they're just LARPing without fighting, which is in itself kind of nerdier and more boring. At least in LARPing, you get to hit things.
I will challenge you so strongly when we get to that episode.
I'm just saying, if I'm going to LARP, I want to at least hit something.
Well, then maybe a North American version of LARP is better for you, whereas someone like me, who would be more story-driven and narrative-driven, who would love to just go hang out at a Ren fair and LARP, a Nordic LARP might be better for me.
I feel like if I was going to a Ren fair, I'd just be like, I'd want to get in and then just try to upset the order. Like I'd want to be, I'd be gunning for king. Ren Fair, you know, like I'm talking
King
to
on the
people.
first day.
I'm Littlefinger. I'm up in there. I'm getting the gossip. I'm turning people against. I'm poisoning ears. That's what I would enjoy.
See, I want to be one of those people that just like don't play the game by the rules properly. I'd be like, oh, that's a nice sword. I got a lightsaber, and they'd be like, you can't do that, and be like, why not?
The worst. I reject
like,
you.
go-
Remind
like,
me
please
never
leave.
to go with either of you. Just leave both of you behind, and I'll go
It's a
by
magic
myself.
sword. It's
I
invisible.
feel like my role playing within that would be very much what some courtier would be doing.
Yeah,
like Littlefinger right
probably. So role playing in fantasy gaming, as kind of we know it in the like coming from early D&D, originated in the late 1960s and early 70s with games like Chainmail and Blackmore, and then early editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And as I was going through a lot of my stuff, I was like almost getting lost into the history tangent, and I was like, no, chatwater, we'll get there. So I would love to do like a history of RPGs episode at one point, which would be really, really cool. So I'm actually curious for the both of you, what do you both enjoy about roleplay?
Tim, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I would say like I think it just facilitates the storytelling aspect for me. That is what is such a draw with tabletop games, especially D&D, is certainly the facilitation of that. And I think roleplay for me, because I have a background in theater and improv, that I don't put a lot of thought into the role playing aspect. It's a very comfortable place for me. So it's like putting on a character. It's not so much it's not a stretch. It feels very comfortable, especially within the improv context. So I don't. Oh boy. No, it's all good. I don't think about it too much in that sense, but I do enjoy like that as a convention to facilitate group storytelling. I think that's why I love D&D so much. It's like I love being able to bring people who are not necessarily improvisers or actors or anything like that into a space where they feel comfortable to engage in storytelling, because I think that storytelling is a foundational human experience. Like it's one of we've been doing it forever. It's one of the things that's that makes humans unique in a way. But yeah, I think it's such a foundational human experience that I love that aspect of it.
That's really cool. What is happening here? Can you folks hear me okay? Yeah, okay.
Sound great?
So I think, before we go on, Yanis, like, what do you like about role playing?
I think for me, I work in the film industry and I work behind the camera. So like oftentimes I see actors and I deal with actors, but I don't actually ever act or perform.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that I was like, it's like a safe place to sort of be like, what is acting like? You know what I mean? Like, what is it like to try and be someone who you aren't? So it's like I felt like it was a very sort of like, you don't have lines and you get to choose make your own decisions. So I thought it was like a safe way to try that. And then I've also spoken numerous times about my love of fantasy and that kind of thing. So it was a way to sort of like inject myself in my own story, or a story that I was involved in, rather than just reading it in a book. But it was very difficult for me in the beginning to feel comfortable role playing, especially because like I started in a group where I didn't really know very many people. So it was like there's like a nervous aspect that goes with that. But yeah, it was not something, like Tim says, he comes from an improv background, so it's super comfortable from him. I came from no background of ever having done it, so it was super foreign to me. The thing is, Kale was my first character, and he has a South African accent, because when I sat down at the table, no one had told me we would be doing accents, and everyone got introduced and everyone did accents, and I was like, oh shit, we're doing accents.
You don't have to do.
No, you don't.
Anyone plays
No.
you do not have to do
an accent.
I had never played D&D and everyone was doing accents, and I was like, oh shit, we're doing accents. And I was like, I don't know how to do it. I was like, I can't just pull an accent out. I've never tried. So I went with the only one that I knew how to do. And so, yeah, there was a lot of things where I was like, didn't really know what to prepare. Adam was like, can you give me a backstory? And I was like, I need a backstory? Like, why do I need a backstory? Like, aren't you just going to tell me what my character does? Like, so yeah, it was an interesting, and this is from someone who watched lots of Critical Role. I just didn't understand what happened. I just assumed there was a lot more sort of like gears turning behind the scenes. Like everyone was always like, oh, it's scripted. Like there was always those people who were like, oh, Critical Role scripted. And there's always part of me that goes, yeah, they probably talk about what they're going to do beforehand. And so I just went in thinking like, yeah, those decisions are made beforehand to sort of facilitate a better narrative. But
rather than like building a narrative on the fly.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
But now that's what I love. Like that's, you know, the moments that occur organically feel the payoff is so much larger. Because your character comes to a revelation, but you as a person come to that same revelation at the same time. So that bleed is very satisfying. So yeah, I don't think I still think like the more I play, the more I try and challenge myself to not play essentially the same character in different clothes.
Right.
But that is still something that like I'm working on. Like there's so many like of you guys who you guys play like unique individual characters every time. Like, well, to an extent. But then myself, I literally just play Kale with different clothes on the majority of the time, different body, like an altered carbon situation.
The more I play Neppy, the more that my other characters just start taking on parts of Neppy, which is something I'm really trying to rein in. But yeah, Saren is there's like little bits of Neppy just bleeding into Saren. And there's definitely bits of Neppy like bleeding into Drew, which are the three characters I play most often. So really trying to like separate those.
It's going to be so interesting when you guys have to finally like kill your characters. Like I know you're not going to kill them, but you're going to have to like say goodbye. Like you're going to have to like put them away. And you might get to take them out like on the rare occasion to play like a special one shot or whatever. But there's going to be a time where you have to like literally be like, you're done.
I think there's going to be like a period. I know for me, there'll be a period of mourning. Yeah. Probably of like, you know, realizing that I'm not going to be playing Neppy every week. And like, she has become so much a part of who I am that I think it's going to like having to, as you say, put her away and just kind of like let her live her life and what she's going to do in the context of the story. It's so funny you mentioned that. Like a couple weeks ago, Len and I were chatting about stuff around characters for campaign 2. Because, you know, when we eventually get there, I have actually a pretty good idea in my head of my character for campaign 2, which is wild. I just kind of like stumbled upon it. And Tim and I have chatted a bit about it. But yeah, I can't even fathom putting Neppy, like not playing Neppy for quite a foreseeable future. So no rush. But yeah, I think it'll be a period of mourning for sure because we're so connected. But in a like from academic contexts, based on like research done about role-playing gaming and kind of more, even whether that's like, you know, more controlled trials or stuff like that, or more anecdotal data, people enjoy role play kind of for three big things. The first thing is empowerment. You get to accomplish a lot of things that you never get to do in your typical lifetime as a human being who lives on the planet that we live on. And folks often can overcome a lot of personal difficulty by working through them in the context of their character. Someone in a previous chatWater episode I talked about a little bit about being a therapist and using RPGs in the context of therapy. So if there's interest about that, I would love to do an episode on how RPGs can be used in a therapy context. I think it's very cool and it's so awesome. So chatWater, we'll get there. And so you can actually have a lot of like personal development and growth by working through stuff in role play. And you actually get rewarded for taking risks that you actually may never take in your actual life. So empowerment's a big part of it. The other bit is relationships, building strong relationships with people that are different than the other relationships you have with them. So I think about like myself and Jen have been friends for a very long time, but not only do we have our friendship as Emma and Jen, we also have Neppy and Yana and their friendship. So it adds different dimensions to our friendship, and it almost allows us to know each other better. You actually get to know someone, a different side of someone, because you're seeing a different aspect of them come through in the character that they're role playing. And when people work through tough shit and like empowering yourself in a role play context, you're often supported by the people that are around you, and it becomes a safe place for you to exist, even if like the world that you live in isn't. So the relationships that you build through role play with people in D&D, or any RPG setting, really, that is done over a long period of time, bring people a lot of good feels and really lovely things from role play. And in the end, it's actually all about something that we term escapism. So it's stepping out of the self for a while, not being you for a while. I always used to joke, like, when people would ask me, oh, Emma, why do you like D&D? And I was like, wow, there's like 4 to 5 hours a week where I just don't have to be me. Not that being me is exceedingly hard by any standings. I hold a lot of privilege in my life, and like, my life is pretty great, but it's also really nice to be able to step out of myself and be someone else for a couple hours a week. And she's great.
I think it's also very like healthy to like, it's almost like a meditative thing. Like that's a large part of the reason people meditate, is because it like silences themselves and allows that them as a person, who they are, to just be quiet for a little bit and sort of rest. And D&D does the same kind of thing. Like who you are in your everyday just gets to sort of like get put in a shelf for a little bit and just hang out, and you get to be someone else. I speaking of what you were saying about the connections you make when you role play, my first D&D party that I played in with Sean, we played for about, I think, almost 2 years, pretty regularly, almost weekly. And there came a time where we'd been playing for a long time, and I didn't know much about any of the people in my party's life outside of D&D. Like, we were basically D&D friends. We basically saw each other only once a week and only in a D&D setting. But we had this sort of sense of closeness that I was much closer with them than I was with a lot of my friends who I saw a lot more often, because there was that level of vulnerability that we had when we role played, and that level of trust that we gained, that I didn't need to be interested in the same things as them. I didn't need to have the same hobbies, but I knew that they cared about me and that they would support me regardless of what happened. I think that's a huge part about why D&D resonates so heavily with people, is you build these relationships that don't make sense on paper. Like they don't there's more value. The value is not equal to like the time put in. Like it's not a direct relationship. I think
it's almost like there's this concept of something like, it's called accelerated intimacy. So because like role-playing games often provide a really, emotionally laden, it's very social. You're being vulnerable, and often because your characters have to trust each other, you all as a party have to establish a sense of trust and intimacy within the group. So it's just that, like, I totally resonate with what you're saying. It's like that intimacy volume just turns up, and you actually end up closer with these people, despite maybe not necessarily knowing stuff about their lives other than the fact that you play D&D with them, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I find is the biggest overlap with improv, is that like the aspect of trust, and knowing that, like, for me, for within an improv context, it's like whenever you go out on stage, and I do a weekly show with more or less the same people that I've been doing for just over 4 years. And then other groups that I've toured with and stuff like that we've been playing together for, decade. But that level of like, just being able to step on stage and know that I can do anything and you'll be there to support whatever thing that I do, however crazy that is or simple it is, like you have that sort of support. And I find that is such a common thread with role playing, where it is that like once you develop that trust within a group, where it's like my character can make any choice, and the group will, like, maybe not necessarily agree with the choice, but there'll be a level of support from the other players.
Yeah.
That like I'm not gonna be ostracized for my character making this choice. And once you get to that point of trust, and I'm always amazed at how quickly it comes. It does happen very fast. And once you get to that point, you like the game just sort of like blossoms.
Yeah.
And I find it often corresponds, like if you start at level 1, it kind of corresponds with like level 3. Like it just kind of, which is, the natural kind of progression of the game. But once everybody's sort of in, like unless you've already played together or whatever, but if it's a newer group, it's like once you have that time together.
And I think too, especially if you've got newer people necessarily who are newer to RPGs or D&D, they're like, once I think about like a party starting at level 1, if you've worked your way through and you're finding this social comfort, this emotional intimacy with the people that you're in the group with, you're also like, there's a mechanical competence to it. You're starting to learn your character. You're like knowledgeable about their abilities. Like, of course, you're asking questions and you're still learning, but you're hooked enough to buy into this thing that you're already doing. You're looking into your character and learning about them, who they are, like personality and background, but also mechanically what they can do. So that level of comfort and feeling like, oh, I'm not going to fuck up this thing that my character can do. Also would add to that emotional intimacy too. Be like, okay, wow, I feel safe with these people. They like what I'm doing and they respect my choices and stuff like that. Which I think is really cool.
That's actually like a super like easy role play tip that I found anyways, was like the more I familiarized myself with the mechanics of the game, the less I had to think about that during the session, and the more I could just like not worry, but the more I could invest myself in the role playing.
Yes.
So I didn't have to draw myself out to be like, how exactly does that work? Like, which dice do I roll? And that's something that's like super within your control to just like, you don't have to know every person's like abilities or every spell or whatever. But if you know what your character can do and how it works, it takes so much weight off of like in the session when it's your turn to roll. It's way easier when you know what's going on. And that's like a super easy thing you can prepare beforehand that's going to make your enjoyment much, much higher.
It allows you to stay immersed, because immersion in RPGs, like that sense of like losing track of time, all of a sudden you look at the clock and you've been playing for 4 hours when the group is all just working together. Everyone is invested in their character, and that sense of flow. And we'll talk about immersion and flow in a later episode. But like that kind of stuff is where the most beautiful role play moments are. And I think that we're going to have a really nice fruitful discussion about some tips around role play, which is like, oh, so cool. I'm excited. Something I find really interesting about escapism, and that is like that sense of like turning off life for a bit, is there's a professor, or she's a game designer who has a PhD in, she has her PhD. It doesn't matter what it's in. She's a doctor. Jane McGonigal. And
Professor McGonigal?
Professor
yeah,
McGonigal.
She's a Professor McGonigal.
Hold on.
Okay.
She has her PhD in transfiguration. So
yes,
clear that up.
So she's designed some really big games, and she consults on a lot of like some of the bigger games out there. And the escapism is her area of research and interest. And so she's broken down escapism into kind of 2 fields of why people immerse themselves in games and why they seek to kind of escape life and do gaming. And this isn't just RPGs. This is like all forms of gaming. Most of her research is in like MMORPGs and stuff like that. So she theorizes that there's 2 things. One is called self-expansion. So this is actively seeking new skills, strengthening relationships, and accumulating positive experiences. All of those can be accomplished through role play. And also self-suppression, which is running away from unpleasant thoughts, perceptions, or emotions, which also can happen while you're role playing. It's the difference between life is better when I have time to play someone else in role play versus life sucks, so I'm going to go be someone else in role play. So I think both of those things are often at play when people are really jumping in and investing in role play. A lot of the time it's like I'm getting really good things out of this and I'm self-expanding, but there are definitely moments too where people are like, nope, life needs to shut off, and I'm gonna self-suppress me and go be this person for a while. So yeah, I know there's definitely been moments like that for me where, work has been hard, life has been hard, or things have been on my mind where I'm just like, at least I have D&D right now that I can just turn everything off and be here and be present with that too. Does that happen for you, like when you're on stage, Tim?
Yeah, somewhat. It depends, like, on the context. Like if it's theater, then it's at a point now where it's a professional thing. So it's like, I love what I do, but it's also work. Like there is a point where like, and I remember that feeling when it started to shift of like, oh yeah, no, this is I love doing this and this is my passion, but it's also a job. So there's that aspect, but then within improv, it for me, and I find this also for D&D, it's, I don't know if it's an escape so much as a creative outlet. It's a place where I like with D&D, I get to exercise my writing skills. I get to like it's like there's an improv component to it for me as well. So it's like I find that I and that can be to a detriment for me sometimes, where it's like I've been, running 2 campaigns and all of this stuff, and it happens to be in a spot where I need to do a lot of planning, and then it becomes creatively taxing, where it's now depleting resources that I don't have now for other projects and writing projects and stuff like that. So I have had times where that has happened. So I find as a DM, it's a bit different for me personally, where it's less of escapism and it's more of an outlet. Whereas when I'm playing, it definitely does feel like escapism, where I can just like, when I get to play Chubb, it's just like, I fucking love it. It's so fun because I can just show up and have fun, right? Like,
yes.
And whereas as a DM, it's very much like I put in the work, this sort of creative work that I then get to see the fruits of as we, as with the session gets run, like as I run the session. And yeah, so it's a bit different, I find. I don't know if that's the experience of other DMs. It's maybe something I'll bring up on the DM show, but cool. I know that, yeah, that's what it is for me.
But when you are like acting or doing your improv stuff, I mean, you're still switching off the concerns and the things of Tim, Absolutely. Right? Like you're not concerned about like, what we're having for dinner tomorrow, or like, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of blank.
I've been in plays that have run for months, and it does get to a point sometimes where you're kind of like, you're just, it can fall into that. So you really have to kind of switch to stay present. So it, like within theater, it becomes a work, and somewhat film too, because you really just have to turn it on when you're waiting. It's like, because there's a lot of time in between, so you just have to get ready to turn it on when you need to. With improv, it definitely does feel like that though. Like when I step on stage in an improv show, I'm not thinking about anything. Like it's all about being present. And I think that that's something that is a skill that can be developed in a myriad of ways. Like I happen to find that through improvisations and performing on stage, but lots of people find that presence of mind through meditation or exercise. But having that ability to, and I try to have that at the table as well. I think it's a really important thing too, is just be there. Just like things like your phone, like kind of having those things aside to just be present in the moment, so you can be open to those role play moments. And I would imagine that would go for a combat thing too, right? Like if it was a combat heavy campaign, you have to be present so what's going on tactically. You have to be aware of, what everybody's doing and things like that. I think being present at the table is super, super important.
It reminds me of this great interview I saw with Seth Rogen at one point, and he was talking about how he knows he's not a very good actor. Like he knows that, like he knows people like him, but he knows he's not very good. And he said he was in this movie once, and I can't remember who the actor was he was acting with. I think it was like Daniel Day-Lewis or whatever. And he was acting with him, and he was thinking, like, as they were doing the scene, he was thinking, like, holy man, this guy is so good. Like, he's such a good actor. And he goes, you know why I know I'm not a good actor? Because in the middle of a scene, I was thinking about how good the other actor was. He's like, I'm pretty sure Daniel Day-Lewis was not thinking, man, Seth is really killing it right now. And I think it's like so true. It's like, it's like that escapism of getting out of your own head, of like being able to switch off your internal monologue. You're talking about people get the same thing out of sports. Like, I run a lot of ultra distances, and a lot of times I'll listen to music or I'll listen to audiobooks or whatever when I run. But when I hit that, like, there are times when I hit like a flow state where I've been running for a certain amount of time, where I can't handle the external input of sound or information, and I take it off, and my mind is literally blank. And it's like it's the weirdest sensation. It'll happen where I'll think of something, or I'll stop to do something, and I'll get running again. And it's like, I remember, it's like I was listening to a song and I stopped it, and I'm waiting. I'm like, where did I leave off? But there was nothing. It was just like internal brain monologue. But I'll be like, I was in the middle of something last time. Like, there's like this, and I'm like trying to find it again. But yeah, it's all about that. Like, I've never thought about it until we're talking about it now, about how similar it is to meditation or
absolutely,
or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Being immersed in something and like finding your flow state is such a freeing feeling, because you feel simultaneously so engaged and connected and competent. Those are kind of like, that's kind of the huge piece, is feeling competent, because you're doing the thing and you're doing it so well that the rest of the world just kind of melts away, and you don't have to be anywhere else but that one place, which is really, really cool. I know, like, for me, like, it takes very specific sets of conditions in like a life setting or a work setting for me to achieve flow. But there have been some sessions within this campaign, particularly I'm thinking like 2 or 3 before we were streaming, where it was like all of a sudden we'd been playing for 4.5, 5 hours at that point, and people were just like, we like ended for the evening because it was late, and we all had lives and work to go back to the next day. And people were like, yeah, but we could play like 2 more hours, right?
Yeah.
When are we playing again? Could we play again like 3 days, rather than waiting a week? So that drive to go back into it, for the role play, for the connection that you have with these people sitting around you. I've talked to my dad before about like role play in D&D context, because he started playing D&D back in the, when it first kind of came out. Big shout out to my dad, Stickman6 in the chat. Love you, Dad. And so he tells a lot of the time about how it was very much a combat oriented game, or at least the table he played at was quite combat oriented and tactical. And the narrative role play that we see now in streams like, like big popular streams like Critical Role and High Rollers and stuff like that, are very role play heavy, and that's not new, but it's definitely become more prominent as D&D's had its like big kind of renaissance in the past 5 to 8 years, especially since like Critical Role has started streaming in 2015. And like combat focused streams are fantastic. There are a couple out there on Twitch that are so good, and the combat is really tactical, very well thought out. The monster, the players are challenged, and it's the point where like the players will just execute these amazing like combat maneuvers, and then they're off on the next thing. Which is, for me, I'm always waiting for the after effect. I'm always waiting for the like, are they going to talk about that? Are they going to talk about that afterwards? And then that doesn't happen. So I think for me, I don't think I would feel comfortable at a combat-oriented table, but I have a lot of respect for people who play at combat-oriented tables and like that is their thing. I think it's great. Go ahead, Yannis.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Em, but like, from my understanding of the history of D&D, it started as sort of like Gary Gygax based it on like war games, essentially, where he wanted to add more of the role-playing aspect. Maybe not necessarily to the point where we've gotten today, might not have been his cup of tea, but he definitely, from my understanding, wanted a tactical based fighting game that had a little bit more of like a fantasy story.
Yes. Yeah. So you have like early, like the very first like war game, like published war game was called Little Wars, and it was like mechanics for rules for like tiny little fighting miniatures,
Like figurines, yeah.
like figurines, yeah. And it was published in 1913 by H.G. Wells, actually, noted pacifist who put out a war. Yeah. Anyway, the things you learn when you go down the rabbit hole of history of RPGs. But so Chainmail and then its subsequent setting Blackmoor was from Dave Arneson, who co-wrote and co-created D&D with Gary Gygax. And yeah, they were looking for stuff to bring in that, like, as exactly as you were saying, the fantasy aspect and the narrative storytelling aspect to a war game. And the both of them were very into fantasy settings like Tolkien, yeah, for sure. So that was kind of where their inspiration came from, is like, how do we how do we put a set of mechanics to this, which was their goal. Is like, how do we walk through a Tolkien-esque world and tell a Tolkien-esque story with mechanics? How can we play that and have that be a game? Which is really cool.
He had a great, I wish I could remember what it is, but there's a great anecdote. We should look it up and post it. But he talks about one of the first encounters, I think, that Dave Arneson ran. He went into this tavern that had a really clever name, and it was essentially like a riddle, and they would go to leave and they would just end up right back in the tavern, and they couldn't figure it out. And then when they finally did, it was like, there's a riddle in the name. But they talk about it being like, it sort of blew their minds of sort of like, oh, okay, like, yeah, this is different. I wish I could remember what it was. It was very clever.
There's a really wonderful book. It's called Fantasy Freaks and Gaming Geeks by Ethan Gelsdorf. He is he also has his PhD, but it talks about his introduction to role-playing and gaming through D&D. He's also a psychologist, if I remember right. Yeah, I think he's a psychologist. So it talks about his entry into D&D and role play and kind of opening up a new world for him that he didn't think existed. Like, there was obviously, like, gaming and the, like, first person shooting kind of games, like, and stuff like that, but having a game where you can play another person who has meaningful arc and story behind them and weight to some sort of approximation of humanity, because that's all we're doing in D&D, right? Like, we're attempting to approximate humanity and, like, beautiful, wonderful social interactions in this fantastical setting to make us feel good.
I think there's also a lot of, like, wish fulfillment in D&D. Like, there's that joke that goes around about, like, how you're getting, someone posted about how you get into your middle age and no one's approached you to be the protagonist of the story yet, and it's like you haven't had that moment where you realize you're the chosen one or whatever. And D&D's the game for those people. Like, it's the game for the people who want to matter in the narrative of the world and oftentimes feel like they don't, right? Mm-hmm. It's I think that's the super cool thing about it, is it lets you have that sort of wish fulfillment. It lets you be the hero. It lets your average person, your normal person, explore what it's like to be extraordinary in a world,
and a camaraderie with
but it's that sort of, like, you are special in that world for certain. And I think that's, like, a wonderful thing about the game, and you share that with people.
Yes, the camaraderie with other people who may also not have felt like they were the heroes in their own story. Like, what a fantastic way to make yourself feel like you matter, because stuff may not be going great for you in your world, in your life, but, like, hey, you get to step into someone who is important, who matters, whose life has, like, this drive and meaning and motivation. You might have a sense of where you're going, what's ahead of you, and that amazing reward of saving the world.
Yeah.
Saving the world, yeah.
Usually, we'll see what happens with Blackwater.
We'll see. Yeah.
The interesting thing as well is that, like, humans, they always want a cause for a reaction. So, like, when things happen that our brains aren't able to understand or comprehend, because sometimes shit just randomly happens, people try and attribute a cause. They try and attribute, and that's how you get, like, all sorts of crazy out there opinions of how things come to be is because people are like,
Yeah.
there has to be a reason. It can't
Conspiracy
simply
theories.
be chance. Exactly. It can't simply be chance, because that's terrifying, that in a world things just happen and there's no control over it. And that's kind of the great thing about D&D is like the D&D worlds are always threatened by problems that can be solved by the people who play it. There's a certain amount of control in that sort of narrative of like, this is the world, it's threatened, and you can do something about it.
You have the power to do something about it.
Yeah, you have the power to fix what's wrong. And like, especially in today's society, there's so many things that are wrong, and it's so difficult to like find a starting point to fix it, if they're even fixable, because some things just aren't. And that's terrifying. And that doesn't, like, D&D's not that. D&D's like, this is the problem and you can fix it. You might not, but you can.
I think
you can certainly try.
You can certainly try. I think there's been moments in my life where I have been uncertain or indecisive, or anxious or scared or feeling unsettled. And there has been moments in my life where I'm like, what would Neppy do if she were here dealing with this situation? Because she would know what to do. Of course she would. Like, she's the high priestess of an entire religion. She has to have her shit together more than I do right now. So it's like I think that there's a lot of like growth for yourself personally, that ego bleed out, where your character may be competent at something, and that your engagement with them, your role play with them, and your understanding of their story helps you in your life, which is like really beautiful. And one of the things I love most about role play. So we should probably jump into tips for folks about how to be a good role player, or a better role player than maybe you are currently. And this is also not to say that like we at Blackwater haven't cracked the code on role play. We don't know everything. There are some moments where I was chatting with Jen about this the other week, and she says there's some moments that we're on fire, and there's some moments that we're on literal fire, like things are bad, and we're just not driving. But when we as a party enter a really lovely flow state, like for me, those are some of the moments where I'm like, yeah, there are some amazing sessions out there.
One of the things that I love about our group, especially, is that there are some people with performance backgrounds, but it's about half and half. I think the majority, in fact, do not have a performance background. So like watching, someone like Matt, for example, who does not have a performance background, role play a beautiful moment with Sean. And this is anyone, like it's like, or when Lennon and I, or like Callie and Kamea, it's like people that it just kind of highlights the idea that like you don't have to be a performer whatsoever to engage in wonderful role play. It's not a requirement, and like it shouldn't be a barrier. It's like, and we're streaming too, like we're in sort of a performative avenue in a way.
There's always a bit of it,
and it's so nice that like I think it really highlights that where it's like it doesn't matter, you don't need that, it's not core to good role playing whatsoever.
And two sort of points to that. The first one is that I also love when the reverse happens. There have been times after the session where Sean, who is someone who does it like for a living, literally goes, I've never thought about role playing this way before.
Yeah.
Like there are people who, like, you learn things from people who are not trained in it, or are not,
Absolutely.
don't have necessarily the experience that he does, but he's still like, allowing himself to be open and that kind of thing. And I think, I forget what the second point was now. Never mind. Must not have been important.
It's been something for me as definitely a non-performer, who's like, I've always been comfortable, I think, telling story in some way, shape, or form, but definitely not in any sort of professional standing. But I think also engaging in role play in this group has also taught me that like I've actually accumulated a decent amount of role plays, like skills that are applicable to role play simply through the work. that I do and the background that I have. I've been working with children for 15 years in some way, shape, or form. So there is always an aspect of stepping into character and having fun, telling story to engage people. And I think that I think anyone who sits who starts playing D&D and wants to be in a narratively driven, kind of role play oriented, or at least having some role play, can examine their life and be like, you know what, I actually do have a lot of these things that will help me engage with role playing. And I think it's also one of the big things too that we've established as a group, obviously after having 100 sessions, is safety. Because you can't play unless you're safe. So we worked out the kinks with role playing early on, but by the time we started streaming, we are not only comfortable with each other, but we're comfortable with our characters. We generally know who these people are. So it may seem more seamless. The people out there watching didn't see sessions 1, 2, 3, 7, 12, 25, where we were still working stuff out.
Absolutely.
And I can imagine that's been an interesting journey for you, Tim, watching all of it.
Oh yeah. And especially even frequency, when it was when we started, it was
once a month.
And then there was times when I think it even dipped to once every 2 months for a little bit.
No, it was about once every month. Once every 6 weeks was the longest.
Yeah. But then to see the group kind of cohesively come together and watch people's as the group started to solidify, as we kind of moved through, watch people's character, watch people get a handle on their own character. And then once they had the handle on the character, and this is something that I think that as a group we have gotten stronger at and continues to be a real value that we take forward, I think is one of the best things to take into a role play campaign, if that's something that's important to you, is not only being comfortable with your own character, but then using that comfortability to then lift up other people.
Yes.
And the idea that, and it's the context that I learned it through was through improv. The best improviser makes their fellow improvisers look good.
Yeah.
And it's something that I hold very dear, and because improv for the most part is an ensemble kind of art form, it's very foundational to what I do. But then I think it's very, very, very applicable to role playing, where it's if you want to be a good role player, be open and looking for opportunities to help and facilitate other good role play moments and other characters. And that if you're all doing that, if you're all thinking that way, you'll all start to shine and have these wonderful, incredible moments, because you're all looking out for those moments in other people to be and lifting them up and looking for those moments. You don't really have to look for it for yourself. They'll just happen.
They just kind of start existing.
Yeah.
I think that's something we've talked about quite a few times with the at least I have. It really resonates for me is being the Scanlan of the group, and being that person who's always there to help other people's narratives be better, help other people's role play be better. And that's something that I benefited from greatly when I started. Was I was lucky enough to start playing with Sean at my table. And Sean is very good because he's very comfortable and he loves interacting with other people. And so even though I was a little unsure about my role play and not super comfortable in it, he really wanted to role play with me. And so he wouldn't let me just hide. He kind of not forced me, but drew into conversation.
Yeah.
He very much was he would talk to someone and then he'd be like, "What do you think?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm part of this now. Now I have to take part and be involved." And that's a great thing you can do. I mean, you have to have a certain level of you don't want to be throwing people out of their comfort zone, but you have to have a certain level of understanding of that they're comfortable enough to do it. You want to lead them slowly. You don't want to just throw them, into the deep end.
And that's a great example, right? It can be as simple as, what do you think? Where it's you're bringing them into a situation where it's now both of you talking to this NPC or another player character or whatever. So it's not just you're hey, you take this one, where it's just now you got to go. It's no, what do you think? Do this with me. And I think
Yes.
having that mentality where it's not just like, we're just going to push this person to role play. It's like, I'm going to
Yeah.
include you in this. And then
Yeah.
it's up to them, right? You give them the power to be like, this is what I think, or they can always hang back. But if you're always giving someone those kinds of opportunities, it's only a matter of time before they feel comfortable and more confident to be able to take them. And I like, it only takes a little bit before it becomes kind of addictive. Like you just, as you get more comfortable in your character, it just starts to blossom.
I'll also say, like, it's really, really helpful when you're starting to mirror your role play over how you actually feel. So like, if you feel nervous and you feel unsure, like your character can be those things. Like it's helpful to mirror that, because then it's genuine. Then that role play is real. Like
Yeah.
when you speak up, when your character gets involved and he's uncertain, it's real for both you and for the character. And
And if you feel like emotionality coming through, like if you feel like, something that's happening is, I know for me, I'm a crier all the time. So like if there's a moment coming through where like I'm watching my three amazing friends role play through something and I start crying, it's like, for me, I feel comfortable enough to do that at the table because of the safety. But also I can imagine that if Neppy were sitting there, she'd probably be tearing up too. Which is it's so wonderful to think about that, like through role play, you can have a space for emotions that may not necessarily be prevalent in your life. And these people will give you space for that. And I think something really important also to remember too is not everyone likes role playing. Not everyone likes that. If you're someone who wants to role play a lot and you're at a combat focused table, you may need to make a change of tables or join another table. And if the combat stuff is really driving for you, great. And you want to, and then spend some time at a narrative table too. That I'd argue that there's always a space for a little bit of role play, but
And I think too, it's a conversation if you feel comfortable, if it's like a group of your friends that you want, like if you are maybe in a more combat focused thing, you like, hopefully you should be able to bring it up with your DM as well, to be like, this is what I would like. Do you think that this would work in what we're doing? It can be a larger discussion within the group, but if you feel like that's not a discussion that you can have with your DM, then maybe it's time to change tables.
Maybe it's time for a different table. Yeah. So I've got some tips here that I've accumulated from a bunch of different spaces around the internet, from all folks who are longtime role players, DMs. Some I've kind of worked in there myself. One of the biggest inspirations I took was from a fantastic DM. His name is Cody. He runs Taking 20 over on YouTube. So I've watched a lot of his videos. I love his stuff. So I've taken a little bit of what he's taken and kind of transmuted it a little bit, and inserted a lot of my own stuff in there as well. And I'm sure that we all have tips and tricks that come up with. And if you have any in the chat too, please feel free to post those there. Those are always awesome. And if you have any questions as well that you'd like us to kind of touch on about role play, throw them up in the chat and Cody will pass them over to us, and we can touch on those at some point, hopefully during the evening. And if we don't get to them tonight, I promise you we will get to them at some point. So I kind of like to think about things that can be done to improve role play in kind of two settings. There's internal work, things that you can do within yourself to improve your role play as an individual role player with your character, and there's external work that you can do at the table in a social context. So I thought it was really interesting before we were talking about that you don't have to have an accent. You absolutely do not have to have an accent to role play a character in any way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of people think you do. I think you have to bring a voice to the table.
I think you don't have to have one that but I think it helps some people
Totally
like achieve a layer of character that's like, it's a simple way into a character where it's like, I can just drop in because it's like, this is the accent. So I think for some people it's an easy way to like form a very base layer of a character, where it's like, okay, I mean, sometimes that's all a character is, and hopefully you want to develop more, but it can be an easy way, but it's like,
One of the recommendations I saw out there was necessarily, if you're not necessarily keen on modifying your voice, is having a catchphrase or a series of like practiced responses of how your character would respond to things, whether those are like exclamations they would make if they're shocked, or things they would say when they introduce themselves to someone. Changing your phrases of speech to have it not sound like you makes it really easy for you to step into your character. I think Tim and I talked about this a lot when I was kind of developing Neppy's voice. I have a couple keystone phrases that if I lose her accent can hop me right back into them, because sometimes I lose her accent and then it kind of it ambles over there into something very more. What do you mean? What's this?
What are they? What are they?
Oh, my keystone phrase?
Yeah, you can't just say you have them and then not share them.
I'm glad you're here. Yeah, it's the like tightness in her voice when it pulls out that way,
and it's the way they roll, the words roll into one another.
Yeah, and the A's, the that kind of sound in the A.
Totally a voice acting thing too. It's like
you taught me that, so
it's a very simple voice acting technique.
I think it's interesting too because it's something that, like, as a huge fan of fantasy, like reading, it's something that's the way that writers differentiate character voices in written word, because you can't hear their accent. So they have phrases or things that they say. There's one character in the Stormlight Chronicles who always says Goncho. He calls everyone Goncho. And that's just like, he's the only one who does it. And it's such a,
so you know it's him.
You always know it's him. And Brandon Sanderson, who writes the Cosmere books, has characters who cross through all the different universes of the books. Mm-hmm. He doesn't always tell you which ones are, but he's built these characters who use phrases and words that you'll see a character who has a different name, but uses the same phrase. Yeah. And you know it's that character. Like, that'll be the only time you see him, and the only explanation, and the only way you catch it is if you know, like, oh, that's his expression, like that's his catchphrase. And that's a great, I've never thought about that, but that's a fantastic tip to have.
And also, like,
words and phrases.
If you're someone who is trying to practice an accent or some type of voice modification, if you have some time alone out on a walk or in your car, if you're someone who drives, practice. Practice is everything. It took me through, like, Neppy didn't start off this campaign with a voice. Did not. But then over time, it just kind of felt more comfortable, and I got more comfortable with it. And then car drives, I was driving a lot, or I was at home a lot with my little one by myself, and would just start talking to her in Neppy's voice. Or I would start reading stories like Beatrix Potter books in a tradition, like a very staunchly British book in Neppy's voice. And it just felt easier to hop into that. And there's no harm in it. I mean, nobody's going to know that you're talking to yourself in your car.
I overdid it with our daughter. She now goes, do normal voice. Do the normal voice.
Yeah, she doesn't like when Tim does voices anymore.
When I was preparing for Adam's birthday Australian one shot,
yes,
I found an Australian chef on YouTube, and I essentially just watched a ton of his videos, and then, like, there were phrases that he used that I just, like, literally wrote down on a piece of paper and was like, okay, these are phrases that I know are like quintessentially Australian phrases that, like, even if my accent is terrible, I can work these in and it'll kind of sell it.
Yeah.
Another voice acting tip is you can try doing an impression of someone, especially if you really can't do an impression of that person, so it becomes a bad impression. But if you do that enough, it becomes its own voice, and you can just use that voice.
I love that.
Yeah, there's a list somewhere floating around that are like famous voices in cartoons and stuff like that are just like the voice actor being like, oh yeah, that was just my bad impression of so and so.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And like those kind of practiced responses or catchphrases or voices actually start giving you an avenue into your character. So maybe you don't have their entire backstory fleshed out, but this encourages you to spend a bit of time with them. I like to imagine sometimes that characters are like a friend They're like your friends, so that you may not know everything about them. You're still discovering things about them along the way. So spend time with them. You play them once a week, maybe twice. Give them time out of game so that you get to know them a little bit, which is cool. Another couple tips I found out there. Have a dynamic character goal. You don't want your character to stay flat and static because human nature changes all the time, and we as humans tend towards growth. So in role play moments or in a campaign that is more narratively driven, you want your character to have the opportunity to grow and evolve and learn like all humans do. We don't stay the same throughout our lives. Set goals. You may not have like very specific goals, or maybe you do for what you want your character to accomplish or where you want them to go. Very broad. It helps give you some direction because you'll be drawn towards moments where your character can develop through that way. If you see opportunities for your character to have those moments of growth that might meet those goals you have, you might be feel more likely to engage in a role play opportunity that would do that. I know for myself personally, anytime for Neppy, one of the biggest things anytime she got to have the opportunity of choice, that was really big. Anytime there was an opportunity where Neppy got to choose something, that was huge moments where I felt really pulled towards, because at the beginning of the campaign, Neppy didn't feel like she had any choice in the world at all. So that's been something that's always drawn to me is Neppy wants choice. She wants agency. She wants autonomy in the world, to feel like she's more than a vessel for her goddess. So those have been always something that I've been drawn towards, is dynamic character growth. Yeah. And another thing that can be really helpful too is backstory. So actually next week on chatWater, Yanis, Cody, and I will be talking about how to create a character. We're going to actually be creating a character on stream with the help of everyone in the chat. It's going to be super fun. And I've also convinced him to put this character in the campaign somewhere. So you're going to want to come hang out with us and help us build this character. We're going to write some backstory for them.
Oh,
We're going to
build
roll
him
stats.
so broken for Tim. just a broken character. Here's
No.
it's going to be like handing him like an angry alien baby that's not and being like, here you go.
I approach character building in a kind of, this is not.
She's very good at it.
Thank
She's
you.
Very, very good.
Thank you. I approach it in a very kind of nuanced
feel like you're
way.
biased, Tim.
No, I have had sessions where, even for example, the Makers one shot, where some of the makers, we were coming up with characters and they were like, they hadn't played as much D&D, so they were like, okay, can we get some help? And they asked me, and I was like, I will help you, but I'm also gonna get Emma to do it because she's way better at it. She has developed like a very like
narratively driven system
and effective system of doing up a character.
Well, I'm excited.
I kind of jump around. I'm just like, yeah, okay, and then you're doing this, and you can roll these, and then she's like, you can do this, and then this. It's a very like linear, makes total sense.
Yeah, but nobody's surprised that it's linear and ordered and organized.
It's
because
great. It's good. It's good for people who don't have an experience rolling up a character. It makes it very streamlined.
We're gonna get to next week, and she's gonna be like, "This is my book. It's called M's Guide to Character."
And it could be a pamphlet, just a little.
Yeah,
pamphlet.
everyone's gonna receive their textbook in the mail. Please.
Yes, 100%. Also, if people did want a pamphlet, would make you one, or if people wanted a like instructional guide, would be happy to post that on. Okay, well now I have to do it. I've said I'm going to do it, so now I'll do it. Great, cool. You said it, and now it exists. It happens the other way too, Tim.
Yeah, companion reading material.
Absolutely. So when considering backstory, a lot of people talk about all the negative things and all the shitty things that have happened to this character to prompt them towards going adventuring. Who was it? It was, I think I saw a tweet thread between Marisha Ray and Liam O'Brien where they talked about how nobody who's happy in their life goes adventuring. That like nobody, who buys a vineyard, gets married and settles down with kids all of a sudden decides one day I'm going to go adventuring unless something shitty happens to you. So people will often have like a negative inciting event that prompts their character to go out into the world and leave a typical life for folks in a fantasy setting to go out and be an adventurer and end up saving the world. But when you're writing this backstory, think about what makes your character happy. What excites them? What do they enjoy? Roleplay can often get really stunted or stale when you're solely focusing on what you hate, because that it also can be super draining, and you'll actually often miss moments of joy and warmth and compassion and mirth and frivolity when you're entirely focused on the negative all the time. And those having moments like that will resonate with you in a positive way will actually prompt, like, on a neurological level, all of some like really lovely, happy endorphins and neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that make you feel good by this something that your character's doing and will make you want to do it more. So write that into your backstory about what you like, what your character likes, what makes them like very comfortable and reminds them of home. Neppy really likes pie. Neppy loves pie. That is something I have known about her since day one. She loves, like, she likes baked goods, but particularly pie. And the smell of like incense makes her feel comfortable anywhere she goes. She carries so much incense with her because anytime she's uncomfortable or like uncertain, she can just light some incense and she's good to go.
Can you imagine if you rolled a character who was like, you know, the guy who's going through his midlife crisis, like he has a wife and 2 kids and like everyth's great and he's just like midlife crisis.
You gotta tell him about
say
Peace
that.
out.
A friend of ours rolled up a character. I guess something bad did happen. His wife divorced him, and his therapist told him that he needed to expand. He was a substitute teacher
for an alternative RPG setting. He was a barbarian.
And his therapist was like, you need to go out and adventure to this will help you get through your divorce.
Or if you rolled like a kid who's in high school and they're trying to get into a prestigious university and the guidance counselor is like, you need more extracurricular activities.
You need to go adventuring.
You need to join like a group or a club, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna join an adventurers club. And there's like no negative, like good family, nice parents, like great future.
Yeah, they weren't an orphan who then joined a thieves guild and then,
just need that extra credit for university.
You could find it.
You can find good things. Something else, another tip that I thought that was really great is that your character's background is not the same thing as their personality. So your background may dictate how you feel about things based on what your character has learned about the way that they grew up in the world because of like transactions with the universe. This is the way your character feels about certain things. Maybe they really don't like certain situations or types of folks or because of things that have gone on in their life, but that doesn't dictate their personality. Because you can feel some way about one thing, but also like your personality is the way that you behave and act and present yourself. I'd encourage you folks, if you're kind of unsure of like how to present your character's personality or thinking about the ways that they're going to grow, look up personality traits online. There's like giant lists of them out there where you can go and talk, or values. Values are a fantastic thing to talk about your character. There's a list out there. I use it in therapy all the time. It's like a list of 200 things that people value. Go out there and think about, what does your character value? The top 10 things on that list. Be cutthroat about it. Like, what are the 10 things that your character values? It can give you really, really nice aspects of, like if there's ever moments that call to those values, your character is going to be drawn to them because all folks want to live in accordance with those values. And then that also speaks into the bigger principle of one of the core things that I think for me has really helped with role play is the concept of show, don't tell. Show what your character does, describe their actions, show the way that you do things rather than say, I talk to this person about this. Try and have that conversation. Show, like, what does your body language look like, whether that's you doing the body language or you describing their body language. If that's not something that you can approximate in that moment, show what it looks like rather than telling. I think that can be often really helpful too.
Piggybacking on that too is when you talk about your character, like instead of being like, oh, they do this or he or she does this, using I statements, I find also helps put you in that place much quicker.
That's something actually I was just going to say. It was really interesting. I had never noticed it until someone pointed it out in the chat a couple weeks
Yes.
ago.
Yeah.
That some people in our party use like the character name did this or whatever, and then about half the party, more than half of the party use I do this, and then there are some people who use there's a separation that they put in there. And I don't think it's like a conscious thing. I actually think it flips back and forth. I think most people do both. Because I know M uses I statements a lot, but I know that M has also said Neppy would
All the
do
time.
this. So it is both, but I think the I statements is huge because the person in the chat was basically saying like where I'm from, where we play, it's always I statements. Like our group never uses character name, like Neppy does this. They always use I do this.
Big shout out to Giles. You're awesome, man. Thank you so much for all of Giles and I have been chatting a bit on the Instagram about LARP. And he sent us some really awesome links about Nordic LARP. And so thank you, man, for all that. And
told you,
love what you
M's
do.
obsessed with LARP.
It's so fascinating. It's so cool. It's a concept. Okay, we'll talk about LARP later. We'll get there. We're talking about role play right now, which plays into LARP in bigger context. We'll get there. So something else that like talking about finding the barrier or the line between folks, oftentimes in combat, role play tends to drop off the map because you're so focused on like the mechanics and the tactical stuff. Try role playing in combat. I would encourage you to be your character in combat. Regardless of what your stats say, regardless of what your mechanics say, regardless of all the things that it says on your character sheet, be your character. If your character would do something that's not necessarily the most powerful or statistically perfect thing to do, if that makes sense to you for your character, have that be a moment that you hallmark on, regardless of what's going on. Like that can be a really nice touchstone moment for you. It doesn't necessarily like could be you could cast the most powerful spell and kill the enemy, but you could also do something that feels more in tune with what your character would do. And there's always moments for that. And I think there's also space to like flesh out your attacks. Like if you're doing that, like talk about like something that I always really love to do is read the like verbal, somatic, and material components of spells because they're actually kind of cheeky, which I think is really funny. And the material components are anyway. And talk about that. Like, what do your hand movements look like when you're casting spells? How do you cast this spell? What do you say? What are I was chatting with Sean about this. When he teleports, he says "Bim Bam Alakazam" every time, and I'm just canonically that is how letters casts teleport.
Absolutely.
Now, so I love that. There's this fantastic Instagram that I'm also obsessed with. I'm going to shout out Casting Components. They're a newer Instagram that has just come out. The person behind that is creating, taking every spell from the player's handbook, to my knowledge, and depicting the verbal, somatic, and material components and how they work together to cast spells. So, like, if you're looking for some inspiration, there's lots of folks out there who are engaged with that kind of stuff, and it can add a lot of flair to your the way that you role play. I think of Liam O'Brien in Critical Role and his depictions of Caleb casting spells, and it's like
there must be a supercut somewhere.
There's got to be a supercut of Caleb
because
casting
it's wild.
spells.
He's like it's impressive because there is like he remembers it every time too. It's just he just rattles it off. It's very impressive.
And we're speaking about Critical Role and talking about role playing in the action sequences and in the fights. One of the best moments of role play for me in the whole thing, and if you know what I'm talking about, you know, and I won't spoil it for people who are still catching up on campaign 1, but there's a moment in the final battle where the role play between Liam and
Sam
Regal is so beautiful. Like it's one of the most beautiful moments of the entire campaign, and it's a role play moment in combat. And it's there's so much room there for like, because that's when people are raw and emotional. is when they're fighting. Like, even if we think about you guys, like when Callie had to choose
Yes.
between going after Neppy or reviving Spooky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that was a role play based decision.
100%.
Or the fact that she didn't hold back punches when she was fighting you guys.
Yeah.
It would have been very easy to be like, oh yeah, no, I'm gonna, I'll do a second level divine smite or like whatever. But she was just like, no, I'm all in.
Yeah.
And that also is like 100% a role play decision.
Or I'm thinking of another one when Kokanee killed Alamir, and he like the depiction of the way that Kokanee killed Alamir.
I was gonna say, I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I think Matt Mercer, and I'm sure DMs maybe did this before. I'm sure he was probably not the first one, but that he sort of popularized, I think, and I have definitely co-opted that, of the sort of like, how do you want to do this? How do you want to finish the fight? I think is a really wonderful way. And I'm sure it was probably a conscious decision by him, but maybe not. But having that space to be like, how do you want to finish this fight? How do you want to kill this creature or whatever, is a role play. It's a role play opportunity, right? You're handing a player an opportunity to role play where they like, and it's just descriptive, like it, but it can be whatever, right? And then as a DM, just rolling with whatever that is, right?
The Not Another D&D podcast, they take that to like the next level, where a lot of times where they're like, how do you want to like end the fight, they describe things sometimes that are not even like possible for their character. Like they'll literally be like, oh, I don't do it, I let him do it, or like, I step back and let so and so finish it. So like mechanically they've won, but the story they tell is different from the dice they roll. And
totally.
That led to some wonderful moments, because they had like a whole running gag where the one guy would keep getting knocked out, and they would always, when he woke up back up, be like, oh, you're the one who killed him. And for like his character would just thought he was always the one who defeated everybody because they just lied to him. But yeah, that is
great.
I think that's one thing that a lot of people forget, is like there doesn't have to be a separation between the action and the role play.
Yeah, the line between combat and role play is non-existent. Like you are your character in a fight.
That's one of my favorite Kale things, is like he's got a spell, Investiture of Flame, and basically it just like engulfs him in fire. And that's one of my favorite things, is like I always try and build in a moment, especially if I can do it right at the beginning of a combat, where he sort of like separates himself from the group, because it does like area effect damage, but like he sort of walks away from the group and then like just like flame ons, like as he does. Like I always think visually it's such a good like as he walks away, and it's creating those like visual moments that bring satisfaction.
Those are really great. I'm so obsessed. Like I think of Neppy's spiritual weapon. Yeah, when the mechanics and the narrative kiss. That's so good. Yeah, so good. Another tip that I really like as well is asking story-driven questions to NPCs. So talk to these people that are in the world, because these people are going to have knowledge. They are characters generally with lives and stories to them as well. So talk to them about the story. Don't just take the quest and run. But maybe you do have to take the question and run. But then again, that is also part of the story. But asking story-driven questions to NPCs can show your investment in the story and in your character. And remembering those things. And a good way to remember is by taking notes. So this doesn't have to be, you don't have to become the lore keeper in your campaign. Okay. That's something that I just took on, because that's how my school notes were a different story. This is a more pared down version, but like taking notes is really helpful. Whether I think of Sean, for example, Sean post-it notes. There's post-it notes all over that he keeps in eyeline while he's playing. And I think that's fantastic. He's taking notes of names of important NPCs, questions he has.
His shit list.
His shit list, like letters of shit list, like taking notes if you can, or doodling. I know one of the reasons, the things that inspired me to make my Neppy book was Jen's book for Spooky. She doodles all over it, and I like to imagine Yana just sitting reading and just doodling on everything she's reading. So you're more invested because you can call back to things, and when you're able to kind of engage with it in a different medium, it's easier to go back to as well. So you're not having to necessarily rack your brain for the name of that NPC and the place that they said you had to go. You've got a written log of it, or a drawn log of it in some way, shape, or form. Again, it's not for everybody, but it can be helpful. From one lore keeper, take notes, please. Help your DM out.
Help your DM out. It's very helpful.
I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, it's definitely reinforced because Tim asks me questions about, what did you guys do? Where did you go? What do you know about this thing all the time? And then I've just become like, I really like knowing.
Well, it became twofold for me, because there was stuff that I had written and planned that never got to, or they have an interaction with an NPC that goes a certain way, so they don't get all the information necessarily that NPC might have. And so I would be like, so in my notes, I don't necessarily, when I'm playing, I don't necessarily take note of like, oh, they got this information and this information, or if I miss that or whatever at the end of the session when I go back through, then it's like, do you know that?
There's been a couple times where we've slipped up, but something I try to be really conscious of is there's moments of things where I, as Emma, know all about that, whether it's from this campaign, extra knowledge that I have, or stuff that Tim and I have talked about. He doesn't tell me much. Sometimes he'll just go, ooh, I wrote this really great thing, and I'm like, I hate that because you can't tell me about it.
Then the other part of it too is I improvise a fair amount, because you as players, you all make choices that I don't anticipate, and so then I have to quickly make a little note of that, and if I forget, it's like, wait a minute, who was that? Right.
I give Tim access to my notebook, so he's welcome to go in, but he's more likely just to ask me because it's the recording systems.
What was that stupid NPC's name?
Yeah. Something else that I think it was something that I always thought implicitly about, but never had like explicitly heard, is rolling with failure. Not necessarily rolling the dice, but like being comfortable and flexible about failure, because you're going to fail in role play settings all the time, whether that's because of a dice roll or because of what's going on with the other characters and the way that they exist in the world. Take that and roll with it and turn it into a moment of character development and growth, rather than a moment where the number on your sheet, if you rolled a dice, went wrong. Also trying to accept that there's like a limit to the amount of times or to the extent you can try something. Like there might be time where you just fail, and then you might just have to live with that or not. Like there could be good, positive, neutral, or negative consequences to that, but allowing your character space to like deal with consequences, I think is a fantastic moment of character growth, rather than just like hitting your head against a wall trying to do the same thing, because the DC is going to go up every time you fail at it. So let yourself,
if you're even allowed to roll it again.
If you're allowed to
roll
roll
it. It's one of those things where it's like, and it can be a moment of metagaming where you roll a natural one, or you as a player are like, shit, like I fucked up and I'm not going to get that thing, or I'm not going to learn that piece of information. So you know, sometimes there's some wiggle room around, like, I'm going to try this different tactic, but also like you tried your best and you failed. Like that's something as a DM that I think about. Like when you try something, you're always doing your absolute best. You're trying your absolute best. So if it fails, you've tried your best and it failed. Like,
yeah.
I think one of the best tips that Adam and Sean gave me when I started, when you roll your character, when you roll your character, use one of the lowest rolls that you have, and help that inform the character. So Kale had bad wisdom, and so I knew that my character would not be world wise. Like he had high intelligence, but he would just not know about the world.
Yeah.
And that informed a lot of how he reacted to
Yeah.
situations about like, would he know about this? Like, would this be something he has experience with? And yeah, just
Oh,
Did we freeze or did he freeze?
You-
Oh,
use
Oh.
those failures and
You're
those
back.
low rolls to inform your character.
Yeah,
totally. I think that
absolutely.
can be something really helpful is like, I think a lot of times people talk about their dump stat as if it's something that can be really negative. But like playing into that, it can be maybe that you're not a charismatic, your character's not a charismatic person. Roll with that, and that is okay. And maybe your character becomes more charismatic, or maybe they're like they start getting really good at persuading people, they gain proficiency in persuasion, even though they're not the most charismatic person or something. Or I think
Wait.
about no, go ahead.
I was gonna say I think about Keyleth.
Yes, I was literally just gonna say the same thing.
Critical Role.
Takes
Campaign 1.
the inspiring leader feat.
And is not a good charismatic character. And she played it really wonderfully throughout the whole campaign.
Yeah.
She always held true to that like Keyleth was not a charisma, always putting her foot in her mouth. And it was great. Like it was an absolute it was an awesome role play moment that I think is very underappreciated. I think a lot of people don't really realize the extent that she put effort into that.
Keyleth as a whole was such an underrated character, I think. Absolutely. Largely because of how well she played it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Shout out to Marisha Ray all the time.
Because the character,
fuck yeah. Oh
no.
Freezing. The character was meant to be awkward.
Yeah.
And the character
Absolutely.
was meant to be awkward and strange.
Yeah.
And that amount of role play opportunities that she took with it were just chef's kiss, mechanics and stats, or mechanics and narrative kissing. So yeah, and also DMs are secretly rooting for you. They are. Like, just trust that your DM is secretly rooting for you. And if they're not rooting for you, maybe that's not the right table. No, maybe it's just not the right table for you.
I'll save that for the show on Wednesday.
Yeah. And I think there's also, when we talk about the GM styles, that's a conversation there too. But yeah, most DMs are secretly rooting for you. So that's kind of the more like internal stuff that you can do internally to help make yourself a better role player. But there is also a decent amount. There's a couple things that you can do at the table. And I think Tim, as someone who DMs regularly, you'll be able to see. I think you'll be able to speak to a lot about how this, when things don't go well, how this plays out. Giving the people at the table time to respond to what you say. Giving space and sharing space at the table. That's something that we in Blackwater talk about a lot. We talk about ways to share space with each other. It's really easy to get on a roll with your own dialogue, but the joyful moments and the like beautiful moments in role play are often when there's multiple people engaged with dialogue together, often without the DM. It's player to player. Or there's obviously like really amazing moments that can happen DM to player too, but multiple people being involved, and let people process in their own time, because they're also like having to integrate how they respond as an individual, but also how their character responds, which may be two disparate things. So because cutting off other people, or the DM, which actually usually comes from a place of excitement, not maliciously, can seem really dismissive if it happens a lot. And I think that's something that we've been working on, especially with streaming too. That's something we have to be really careful of.
Yeah,
especially streaming on Zoom.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's the way we play and the lessons we've learned playing on Zoom is going to really make the play in person much better, because we've had to, it's like an over exaggerated way of having to give each other space.
Yes.
And that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it becomes a thing where if you find yourself, I think sometimes it's a comfortability with silence that that, and this is a performance thing too. This happens in improv all the time, where like sometimes you can get on a roll, but sometimes like the most interesting thing to watch, or like the funniest thing sometimes is when something just starts in silence. Like when you just like, I've seen so many scenes that just kill me that are just like the first 30 seconds, it's just silence. Just somebody tasking, just doing something really simple, but really like specifically, it's so funny. But I think just in general, a lot of people, and this is myself included, like aren't always comfortable with silence. And in a role play setting, I think if you aren't, if you're sort of unsure, and it becomes sort of a lack of trust, like if you don't totally trust that everybody's, invested, there can be a sense of like, I should say something, I should keep. And I think it's amplified within streaming too sometimes,
Yeah.
because it's like it feels more like a performance, so it's like we should be doing something, this isn't interesting, and it's like it is, we just all have to hold that space. So
Yeah.
like allowing those moments of quiet, and they're never as long as you think they are, and and they always lead to, especially around impactful stuff, because it's easy, and I am guilty of this as well, because I love to make jokes, but breaking a tense moment with a joke because you're
Oh, yeah.
uncomfortable is satisfying in some ways because it's funny if it's a funny joke, but it like really can undermine
Mhm.
really more like moments of depth and things like that. And it often comes from a place of, if you're someone who is maybe uncomfortable with that, or uncomfortable being in that kind of vulnerable position, it like if your go-to is humor, then making a joke in that moment seems very easy and a way for you to feel better, but it can really undermine, and it can also squash other people's creativity, right? When they're in a moment of vulnerability. And what winds up happening, if that happens too much, you start have people start to close off, because it's like, well, I can't be vulnerable because as soon as I get there, somebody starts making jokes.
Yeah.
And like I said, I am guilty of this, and I love a joke, and I'm the first person to jump in on a riff, um, but just keeping that awareness, and also knowing if you're someone who is uncomfortable with that kind of vulnerability,
Yeah.
you still have to hold space for other people to be comfortable with it.
That was
Totally.
something I was going to say too, is like buy in, like when
Yeah.
you sit down at the table, like
Engagement.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you sit down with a thought in your mind of like, this is going to be kind of lame and it's silly what we're doing, like it is going to be that. But
Yeah.
if you buy in and you commit to like being your character and like you give it a proper go, it's
Yeah.
going to be so much more rewarding for you and for others.
Yeah.
And
No one wants
realizing
that person at the table who's not committing.
totally. And realizing that like engagement takes work, and is dynamic and changes all the time. Like I know there's sometimes for me, especially if I'm experiencing like body pain or fatigue or stuff like that, that I can find it hard to stay engaged. But something that's really important for me is like I get so much joy from watching my amazing friends role play, and like some of the most powerful things that I've witnessed in or been like seen in this game had nothing to do with Neppy. um, and I know, and I also recognize too that engagement looks different for everyone, whether
Mhm.
that's staying engaged. But I think it's a point of that role play can really have so much space at the table if you stay engaged in the ways that you can, with like, so avoiding being on your phone, avoiding if you're like on an electronic platform, like avoiding being on different websites, try just to do this one thing, whether you need to like talking about doodling, drawing in a notebook,
Mhm.
And yeah, immersion breaking I think is a big thing for me that makes me feel less comfortable at the
Mhm.
table. And it's like, and it definitely comes from a place of excitement and joy, and it's never it's I generally not malicious, but it can definitely pull players out of immersion and make them feel less safe.
Mhm.
So that can be something that if you're noticing that's happening with someone at the table and it's making you feel uncomfortable, talk to your DM about it. If you don't feel comfortable talking to that player about it, or if you do feel comfortable talking to that player, maybe let them know how you feel. Speak for yourself. Using I statements is really, rather than you make me feel this way, when this happens, I feel this.
Mhm.
Or when this happens, I don't feel as comfortable doing this. Speaking for yourself is always a really great way to help moderate those
Yeah.
situations. But engagement, I think, is something that's so key.
And I think too, knowing the sort of group dynamic is also important around that. Like if it is a group that is sort of more, lighthearted or
Quippy.
or quippy, it's like that's fine. But I would argue that there is still moments if it's important to you that there are still moments to be found within that. And I think one of the best examples that immediately jumps to mind for me is Dungeons and Daddies, which is an absolutely hilarious D&D podcast. But they have so many moments of brilliant role play that are just like I've wept listening to them. But
so have I.
But it's a very like the premise itself is ridiculous and so funny.
Hi, Spruce. Oh, buddy.
Give you a hug.
Just time for hugs. Oh. Oh my God, you beautiful dog.
Just needed a hug from Dad before bed.
We actually just had hopefully we can get to this. I've seen a question from chat come through, so thank you for sending that over, and we will get to that one before the end of chatwater tonight. Something else that I think is definitely an important thing to consider is something I've termed flexing. So be aware when you're flaunting things that your character can do for other players simply because you can. It can come through as spotlighting. And generally, even if your character has the ability to mechanically, statistically to do all the things, let others have a go. Create space, save space for other people, actively try and do that for yourself. Rather than just dashing in every moment to accomplish all the things yourself and have a one-person session, leave space for other people to try things. Let them fail. Because some of the most beautiful moments of roleplay come from moments of failure. Also, failure is okay. There is a 5% chance every time that you roll a dice that you will critically fail something. So failure is built into this game. So other people are going to fail. You're going.
Are you trying to scare me, Em?
Yeah.
I think
such a high chance of failure.
It's so much more fun when things
Failure's
go
fun.
wrong.
I think that that comes in a good example of that is wizards become kind of OP when it comes to unlocking things at some point. And that's a rogue's whole thing. And a lot of times wizards, they can just do it. They can cast knock, or they can, just unlock it.
Kokanee with the box.
Exactly.
Kokanee with the box.
Leonard could have just been thankful he didn't. Oh, it crossed my mind. I was like, oh, please don't.
But that's what I mean. Just because you can, don't take away someone else's opportunity to play their character.
Yes.
Rogues are super helpful in the beginning, and then their lockpicking becomes less helpful as you progress.
Especially if you've got a wizard around.
But let them still have that. Let them still, narratively, they would still do that. You know what I mean? Narratively, they would still pick locks.
And and I guess that's also a thing too, is when you get super powerful in higher levels, your characters can become, just simply by necessity of the abilities and things that you can take at all these different levels, you can become quite diverse. And that can be really thrilling and exciting as a player who's been playing a long time, to not necessarily just staying in one lane as what your character can do. And if that's something you like, I'd encourage you to build that one or two things into your character at the very beginning. And we'll talk about that when we talk about chatwater. We'll get there. If there's something that maybe your character should be good at, but isn't, or things that you might not necessarily be good at, but are because of something in your narratively in your backstory. But if you know that there's a player in your party who is particularly good, and that is their thing, let them do that thing. Try not to dash in and dash them. Yeah.
I would even say that be looking for those things in your other players. What are they good at? What are their strengths? How can I, elevate them in that position? How can I put them in a position where they can use those strengths? So
let the wizards look at the magical shit. You want to know how long this person's been dead? Let your cleric do that. You want to read this really creepy spell tome of thing that you find in the back of a library? Your warlock can probably be. They're good with the creepy tome pack stuff.
I think even with when you talk about wizards taking a spell like knock, I think even that everything can be a role play opportunity with something like that. It's why would your wizard take knock if you had a rogue in the party? Why would they need that?
Yeah.
Well, like if I was like if you were an actual wizard, you'd be like, well, I don't need that spell. That's just a waste. I could be learning this other thing that we don't have.
Yeah.
So where it's like, if you think about that, or if it's like, well, I've been working with the rogue and he wants me to take this because it's going to help us get into this. It's like, you know, or a heist or something. Then it makes sense. But even think about that when you're looking at your spells, especially spellcasters or things like that. It's like, well,
Yeah. Or weapon proficiencies. Like if you're
Yeah.
wanting your character to be proficient with something, or like a tool proficiency, work that into role play for sure. I think skills can be taught in D&D. Like it takes 8 weeks or whatever modifiers, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But if you're wanting your character to learn something or be good at something that they're not already good at, that can happen. It just may take time and effort and is role play opportunities. And one of the last things that I've got here on my list is backseat role playing or backseat DMing. Let the DM generally arbiter the flow of the game. They're the ones who are kind of overseeing things. They've got, eyes on everything. Try and avoid backseat DMing, especially if that's not the dynamic in the table that's been previously arranged, because there are lots of tables that facilitate co-GMing, or one player assists with DMing, like in combat situations and stuff like that. Those kind of things can all work wonderfully if that is something that's predetermined. Especially if you are a DM at a table who is currently in the player role, that can be something that can be really hard to turn off. Or like if that just be aware that, like, especially backseat role playing in the context of role play, that can be really, really hard. If you're not in that scene, let the other characters do their stuff. You might need to just stand by especially if there's something around like skills-based things that you could do better, or they could do better, because they're not using the things you think the way they should. Let them make their choices. They are the character, they are the one helming that. Perfect play is not possible. Perfect gameplay is not possible, and nobody would have fun in D&D if it was perfect. If you got everything right exactly every time, you would find it quite boring. Challenge and conflict is, like, in the game, and learning things for your characters, part of what makes D&D so fascinating and so interesting. So that don't rob other folks of experiences just because if you know a way that they could do it better, because that may not be the way that they want to take their character. And this 99 times out of 100 comes from a place of wanting to make the situation more effective, make the player more effective, but it often ends up with the person who is receiving the information, or receiving the tips that might have been unwarranted, feel inadequate or frustrated, and that they don't actually get to play their part, so that can withdraw. That might force them to withdraw and make them feel less safe for role play opportunities at the
I think a
table.
lot of people might disagree with me personally on this, but I think that the rules of D&D are very much just like guidelines for like role playing, because a lot
Yeah.
of times, like if a DM says like, yeah, I'm going to allow that, or if a character says, I want to do it this way, like you can't say, well, that's not how it's done, because in the end, it's about telling like a narrative story. And if the DM's like, this is the way I want to do it on this occasion because I think the story's better and I think it's more satisfying, it's best just not to get into the like, well, technically, he'd do an athletics check and not a, not an, what do you call it? Anyways, but like it's to get into the nitty gritty of it. It oftentimes doesn't tell the good story. It doesn't tell the best narrative. The perfect example of that is like the Adventure Zone. It doesn't follow the rules of D&D like at all. Like I
Neither
don't know
does
if you've
Dungeons and
listened to it.
Daddies.
It's
Neither
just
does
like,
Dungeons and Daddies.
Yeah,
They just
that's
took the
right.
rules and just like,
Oh, yeah.
it's like some of the best D&D, but like by people who've like adjacently heard what D&D is about and decided they're going to try and play it. Like they watched Crit Role but never opened a D&D book and were like, yeah, we know what it's about. Like,
Yeah.
and you can still tell beautiful stories and still have all that payoff.
And
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it, like, I agree, but also it depends on the kind of table that you're at. Like if it is
Yes.
a really technical table that really like is, more focused on mechanics, because there's lots of people who love the raw mechanics.
Like the minutia of wording. Yeah.
That's great. I think that like our group as a whole is it's important, but it's not the focus certainly. And that's like, yeah. And I think also knowing who your DM is too, and communicating your needs, but also recognizing like what are their strengths. Like I know the rules, but I'm not someone who's played a million characters. I don't know every class inside out. So like,
I think it's pretty safe to say, like, I don't think anyone in the group knows the rules quite as well as Adam does.
No, and
like
and
Adam
sometimes,
has like a savant level knowledge of the rules. Him and Sean.
yeah.
But it's
and I find it's helpful sometimes. Like it's like, yeah, if I don't have something, it's like I can just ask, or he can offer it up, and that's fine as long as it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't interrupt the sort of flow of the game. Then it's never an issue.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is to like having a level of respect, like both ways at the table, player to player, player to DM, and DM to player as well. Like a culture of respect and responsibility at a table can go a really long way in making it safe for role play and allowing folks space to try stuff out. Because that's all role play is. It's just a bunch of folks trying stuff out and feeling things. It's
I think that
delightful.
I think that one of the other things is a lot of people think that if they've made a ruling or they've made a decision as to how something is done, that they're then bound to that. You know what I mean? Like, well, that's how we do it. It's like, no, you can very well be like, we did it this way. We know that that's not the way it's done now, so we won't be doing it again. And that's just part of having that open dialogue with your table, where it's like, yeah, we fucked up. Like, that's not how you're supposed to do it. From now on, we won't be doing it that anyway, just so everyone knows. But like, you don't always have to go retcon and fix it.
Well, especially if you bring in stuff like homebrew. Like, because there's a lot of house rules that we have at our table, or house ways for the ways that we do things. Like for us, religion is a wisdom check. If where you're doing something like praying and that's not rules
if it's a prayer, if it's
a prayer.
like I'm trying to remember something about a religious history, then it's intelligence. It's just something that I find makes more sense for me. But even something like, we tried flanking for a while. We had flanking for a long time, where it was like, if you were flanking an enemy, you would get advantage. It just became too powerful, where it was like, because it's an optional rule in the book. And then at some point I was like, this is making combat like it's making combat harder for me to balance it out. So eventually
it's like
just like, okay, we're taking it out. We're doing it a slightly different way.
We use a +2 now, right?
Yeah, I mean, now it's all theater of the mind, so it's like,
that's true.
It doesn't really come into play as much, but when we
may come in more when we start playing in person
again. It's like cleave, for dealing with multiple opponents. It's also, it's just like, it won't fit for everybody.
So one of the things that one of the very early questions that we had when we were starting talking about chatWater was how to bring more role play at the table. Someone in the very, very early streams noticed that our stream was quite role play heavy, and they asked how to bring more role play at the table, which kind of spawned my thoughts about this episode. So here I am discussing how to bring more role play to your table. First and foremost, talk about it with your table. Have an open, dynamic discussion. Maybe not on a night that you're playing. Talk about it as something to try in a future session. Practice that individually and as a group. Set aside a session where you just role play a conversation where your characters are at a festival. Try and roll as few dice as possible.
Like we do.
Kind of like we do. There are some sessions where we're like, oh, I should go get my dice.
I also feel like this conversation could be for like any kind of role play.
Yes.
People's like marriages as well. As soon as you started, that's where my mind like went. And as you went through all of them, the rolling dice kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in that line of thought.
You'd be surprised how many tenets from couples and family therapy are applicable to D&D groups.
I am not surprised.
We'll talk about that another time. And if your table is pretty set against role playing, or maybe the table tries it out and it doesn't go anywhere, maybe try and find a new table that, not necessarily leave that table if that's not something you want to do. I'm not just saying up and root yourself from a table, but try out another table. There are tons of games out there with the, you know, with kind of the world being in the state that it is right now. A lot of games have moved online, and there are like Discord servers. There's stuff on like using stuff like Fantasy Grounds, Roll20. Like there is a plethora of online games out there. And if you don't like a game, you are not beholden to it. You can leave. That is super okay. And sometimes good friends don't make good D&D companions, and that is okay.
I was thinking about at the very beginning of the episode, how D&D groups are very much like a relationship, where sometimes you don't know that the fit isn't right until you're in it, and
Yep.
no one would expect you to go into a relationship and feel like you could never leave it. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you start dating someone and it doesn't work, you leave. But like people have this weird sort of thing about D&D where they find a group and they're like, well, I couldn't possibly leave to see if there's something that fits my style better.
Yeah.
But it's very much like a relationship, you know. If you can start playing in a D&D group and be like, you know what, this is not my thing. They don't play the way I'd like to play, or
Yeah.
I don't gel with them, and you can go look for something else. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
That says you can't. Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing that we always come down to, and we've come down to it in a lot of the shows where we talk about the play, is communication is so important.
Yeah.
Like if you have an issue, or you want to try something new, like talk to people in your group about the style that you play and things that you would like to see
Totally
different.
And tell them, tell them you appreciate them. Everyone likes to feel appreciated, and everyone, like, there'll be some nights, something that was really like, I'm hearkening back to a moment of even when role play got difficult. I'm called back to the moment with the Matron of Vengeance, where I, as Emma, wasn't really okay. Like I was pretty wrecked after that session. I got a message from Sean, actually, and he was like, love you, love your choices, so interested to see where this goes, thank you. And like that showing of gratitude to me meant everything, in a moment where I didn't feel so great after making a choice. So telling your party members and your DM as well, and DMs to players, tell your DMs, talk like you appreciate your players. Yeah.
Well, and piggybacking on that, your character cannot like something, but you as a player should always be supporting everybody else's choices. Like unless it's detrimental to the group or outside of the game, if it's detrimental, but if it's like, especially around difficult decisions, if it's a difficult character choice, your character cannot like it, but you as a player should try your utmost, and again, unless it's a harmful thing to the group,
Yeah.
to support them in that and recognize that it's like, ooh, that was a tough choice, or like that was an insane situation, and like you really pissed off my character, but this is gonna be fun.
Yeah, and that kind of tenet too of that, like, these are people that you experience life with, other than the 4, maybe 2 to 4 hours a week where you play with them. Hopefully, maybe, I don't know. But there are real people behind the characters, and that bleed can be going both ways at that point. So supporting the people at your table, regardless of what their role is a huge way to foster a culture of safety and inclusivity. I know we're running late, but there is one question that we had come through from the chat, and I want to make sure that we get to it. We had someone ask, in addition to Critical Role, what streams do y'all enjoy for good role play?
Well, I was talking about it's a podcast, Dungeons and Daddies.
So good.
I've actually never listened to it.
It's
so delightful. Very quick. This sort of conceit of the show is, I think there's 4 players in a DM.
Yeah.
And they're playing D&D, but they're all dads from our world who get transported to the far realms because their sons get kidnapped, and so they're going to get their sons back. So they're just like regular dads, and then when they go into the D&D world, they all sort of become like, they take on an aspect. They get a race. or not a race, a class.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. They're all comedians and improvisers, but there is also like so many great heartfelt moments.
Yeah.
And they lean into those really, really well. Like if you want something that's a lighter fare, it's only about an hour. Like each episode is about an hour.
Yeah.
So it's definitely lighter, but then like there are also moments of beautiful role play, and they take it like they really invest in their characters. It is silly and fun, but they are very much like they get into the detail and specificity. It's very fun.
It's one of my favorite D&D consumables out there.
And it's a much easier buy-in than I find even something like Critical Role, because Critical Role is like, I love Critical Role, but the episodes are like 4 hours long, and sometimes that's a lot of investment. So this is something that's a much easier investment.
Go ahead, Yanis.
No,
you
no,
go.
I am. Okay.
Oh, me. Okay. No, you go. You go. A truly Canadian moment. You go, Yanis.
I love the Adventure Zone. I think that's probably, especially the first arc that they have, is probably one of my favorite of all time. I think they introduced me to a lot of things. It's a D&D podcast, but they also venture into the apocalypse system. Especially even in the first arc, they have like mini chapters, and they do a whole chapter where they don't play D&D. They basically play like their own version. But Tim, have you not listened to the Adventure Zone?
I haven't. I've listened to like the first episode, and then I just didn't pick it back up.
The Adventure Zone, and I will pre-warn everybody, none of them know how to play for like the first 6 episodes. So it's pretty rough.
When you say that, it's like, 6 episodes, that's a lot.
I know, but I'm telling you,
I've heard it's amazing.
The payoff at the end is like, I cried. You've listened to it, Em?
I am working my way through it.
Okay.
I fell really behind on Critical Role, and I am invested in Critical Role, and have been. Tiana and I like live text through every Critical Role episode. It is my Thursday nights, and I love it. So that's probably the one I listen to most often. But I am working my way through the Adventure Zone. It is much slower now because I'm not driving for a lot of my job, because I was usually driving like 2 hours, 3 hours a day. But I do love what I've heard.
Yeah, the final arcs are some of the most beautiful, and the most beautiful thing about all of it is, and you can, this doesn't spoil anything, but you can listen to it. You can listen to it thinking this, but it's Griffin McElroy plays with his 2 brothers. Travis and Justin, and their dad Clint, who's like in his 50s.
It's fucking
or
great.
older. But the most beautiful thing is Griffin wrote it, and they don't realize it until the end. And then when and it changes the way you listen to it. They lost their mother when they were like teenagers and in their early 20s, and Griffin writes it as like a love letter to his mom, and it just changes the way. Because it's all like goof, joke in the beginning. It's all like really slapstick, silly humor. But the story in the end is so beautiful because of the way it talks about loss and life. And it has depths that you wouldn't expect from the first episodes that you listen to. The other one I really love is NADPod, Not Another D&D Podcast. It's also very goofy to start, like very goofy, which was also a deterrent. It took me like 3 attempts to push far enough in to fully get committed, but it is also beautiful. And I personally find that the dumber a campaign starts, the more rewarding it is at the end.
You're gonna love Dungeons and
Daddies. You're gonna love it.
I got lots of running to do, so I just throw that on.
And the episodes are so consumable. They're like an hour, 10 minutes tops. They're delightful. Yeah, I love.
But I would recommend both of those. The Adventure Zone has done a bunch of other campaigns in different systems, which have been great. I think that's pretty much all the D&D specific podcasts I have managed to work my way through. And do you
I
have any others?
love high rollers.
Mm.
So I really, really like high rollers DM'd by Mark Humes, and they're playing like a really long-term campaign right now with kind of a lot of homebrew in it, which I love. Like I'm obsessed with homebrew. I love when people tinker and create worlds and build their own stories and stuff like that. So their main campaign is one of my favorites that I've listened to or watched on Twitch. All their stuff is on YouTube as well. And sorry. They're also started up a second campaign where they're playing Curse of Strahd, which is really cool to watch a exceedingly veteran DM, like so talented, run a module, and how he can adapt a module to make it like not necessarily just book as written, which I find really fascinating, and I can imagine it is such a skill. So I'm fascinated with that. They're very British, and I love that. So I have some good laughs with that too. So I really like high rollers. There's a couple other Twitch channels that I really like. Saving Throw show did a Ghost of Saltmarsh campaign a little while back that I really liked. But primarily, I am Dungeons and Daddies and Critical Role are kind of my two. Yeah.
I remembered another one it was one of my sort of gateways in. I'd been watching Crit Role for a while, but I watched it more for the role play. I didn't really understand D&D as a system because they don't really do much to explain it outside of what you pick up. But I watched Geek and Sundry did one with Will Wheaton called Titan's Grave. It was like Crit Role. They had 4 voice actors, and he ran it, and it was very much like almost an introduction for Crit Role. So they would when they rolled, they would show what the dice were and how it all added up on the bottom of the
that's
screen.
nice.
It was all pre-recorded and like very well put together, and they had like companion art for what they were describing, so that you could like have a visual. It was a very sort of like easy consumable thing. I know Will Wheaton had some falling out with Geek and Sundry about it after the fact, so I don't know if it's still available through Geek and Sundry, but I'm sure it's available on YouTube or some places. But it's a fantastic one as well. It's a great sort of like entry into D&D podcasts. It's not a podcast; it's a visual one, but it's quite good.
And I think to that too, like a lot of these bigger streams that are out there, these are like professional actors a lot of the time. And like people who are now essentially professionally playing D&D for a living. Like, because if we think of Critical Role, they are voice actors, and that is what they were doing for their careers before they started Critical Role. And now they play D&D professionally. They get paid every week to perform. Because while it is, yes, it is at the end of the day, like there is, they're playing in this room now socially distanced with their friends. There is this little performative aspect to it that sits back here that cannot not inform choices and the way that things go. It simply does, because it's consumed like this.
And they all have a very intimate knowledge of storytelling. Like that's been their whole profession. So every choice that they make is made through that lens of it's subconscious at this point, I'm sure, for a lot of them, but like everything that they're doing is always through that lens. So it seems like their stories become these grand sort of great epics. It's because they all have that storytelling lens on everything. So every time they're making a choice, it's always in service of the story. And they have worked very hard, obviously, throughout their careers, that it's second nature to be making these like decisions that pay off really well.
And not only that, but they're actors who have been creating stories with their voices for a very long time. So it's not necessarily like, I mean, what the fuck do I know about acting? But like standing up in front of someone and using body language, you have to be able, like, voice actors are trained to like tell story where you could close your eyes and you can hear them going through it. So they are perfectly suited to that medium of storytelling, because it's something they've been doing their career their whole lives, and they are kicking ass, obviously, and it's amazing. But they've also been doing that for a very long time.
And you can achieve, not like, you don't necessarily have to achieve that level of grand storytelling, but you can achieve role play moments that are on par, if not better, than
if
any
you buy
moment
our
in Critical Role.
4-set
That's
DVD.
right.
On how to role play
At your own table, like in the privacy of your living room. And in fact, I think you can get moments of role play that are even deeper in some ways and more authentic because they aren't in front of a camera. They are at your table, they're with friends, they're like in sort of these private moments. And it like, yeah, you don't ever have to compare.
I will tell you, if the beautiful moments of Critical Role, of all of these podcasts, the way that they make you feel, that feeling is like a million times more when you are the actual characters who are feeling it. Like the whole, and it is quite funny, the whole sort of like irony of Critical Role is they get more enjoyment out of playing it than we do watching it. Like
100%.
people literally pay them money to have more fun than we get for the money. Like it's like paying someone to do drugs for you and then enjoying watching them do it.
Well, and I think there's also a
Like
piece of
it's
like
crazy
vicarious enjoyment, right? Like we are enjoying their enjoyment. Like watching Laura Bailey just like express her id and just like be totally a trickster and all of that kind of stuff, which is, I can imagine, a way that she is in quite her real life, is like gives me such enjoyment that she has found a spot for that in her life, at this wonderful table. And like also there's moments that I have felt with Neppy, and we're not some super big popular channel yet. No, I'm just kidding. But like there's moments that I've had with Neppy where it's like it's unparalleled. Like it doesn't even matter what everyone else has felt, regardless of who's watching it or otherwise. Like those moments for me have been astounding. Wouldn't trade them for the world.
I think basically it's very difficult to go wrong with consuming D&D media. I think all of it depends on how you become invested, and that's basically like, my 4 warnings for both of the recommendations that I made, like Taz and they both kind of are weird and hard to get into. So like there is no right way to do it. It's about the investment that you make with the characters and with the story. So like if you listen to something and you don't like it, like you might grow to love it, and that could be regardless of any of the stories or any of the D&D media that you consume. But I think the number one thing is like prioritize playing, or trying to play, because it is so much more rewarding than if you're on the fence. Because I discovered Critical Role shortly after they just started going live. I think it was like 2016 that I started watching.
And then I watched 2015.
I started watching, and then I kind of fell out and then caught back up, and watched in sort of spurts. But it wasn't until like 3.5 years later that I actually sat down to play myself, because it was just, I didn't think D&D was what made Critical Role special. I was like, oh, it's this group that is special. And then I learned more and more. I was like, no, it's actually just playing with people on the role play of it. So I would definitely say, like, if you watch our show and you watch Critical Role, or you consume any D&D media and you're like, oh, I've never played before, like, go do it. Even if it's at the game shop down the road and you don't know anybody else, or
totally,
it's worth it.
A really amazing thing I saw a couple weeks ago was a couple of our viewers who had, I guess, met each other in the chat, have decided to kind of start playing together. And like folks who'd never played before or who just started playing, and like that is some of the biggest that the community that we have fosters that kind of environment for folks who are coming in who are new to D&D, to be like, hey, like, you're coming to watch this stream, you like what you see here, this is accessible for you, and also you're part of now we're like group hugging you into this Gravel Boy community, and that you feel welcome here means so much to us. And I hope that with this episode that you've been inspired a little bit to go out there and role play, if that's something in a campaign, if that's something that you want to do, test it out, bring it to your party. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, take some risks, commit, communicate, and just, most importantly, just have fun with the roles that you play. We are join us this Wednesday.
Yes.
At 8 p.m. for our behind the DM screen. It's going to be fantastic. And then Saturday, we're back at 8 o'clock for another episode of our regularly scheduled Blackwater. And then Monday, we're back for another chatwater where Cody, M, and I will be actually rolling a character, maybe quite a few. I think we'll each roll a character, and then we'll make one character that goes into the campaign, and we'll make him as broken as possible for Tim to have fun with. And can you imagine if we roll the villain? Tim's like, well, this is the big bad for the next session.
This is the final big bad. Surprise.
And we can just blame it on chat.
And we will, if you are someone who wants to come hang out with us, we will be taking some suggestions from the chat, especially around backstory stuff and feats and stuff like that today. We'll likely be rolling like a level 1 character. So please come and join us. This is a great experience for you too. If you're wanting to roll up a character, come roll along with us, and I will walk you through how to roll up a character. It'll be great. Tim, we blow kisses.
Yes.
To say goodnight.
Yes, I know.
You are very familiar.
I watched the show.
Tim is our number one chatwater fan. Thanks so much for joining us. You guys have a great week. We'll see you Wednesday. Love you guys. Keep blowing while I hit stop.